We have all kinds of material to cover here, lots and lots of stuff. Sometimes when I teach a class about the PCT, it is a class that goes on for 2 days or even 2.5 days. And of course, what we have here today is we have 1 day available, and we will cover a lot of good material in 1 day. But we all kind of understand, even if we spend the whole day on PCT, there's more that's good to learn. What are the ways that you can learn some of that other stuff? Well, I will mention some of the other learning opportunities in addition to what we all have together here today. One of them is that WIPO has what is called the PCT Distance Learning Course. PCT Distance Learning Course. You go to the website of WIPO, you click on Patents, and then you search for PCT Distance Learning Course and you click on it, and it's a thing that you register for, and it's online. It's like stuff appears on the screen, and then you take a quiz, and then you move on to the next unit, and they teach more things, and you take another quiz. And this distance learning course that they make available has, I forget, something like 18 chapters or sections or something, and you can stop where you want and come back and resume and so on. You don't have to do it all at once. You can do it whatever time of day is convenient, you know, the middle of the night or whatever. If you just sat and focused and did the whole thing all at once, you might get through it in 3 or 4 hours, perhaps. If you already kind of knew a lot of the PCT stuff, you might get through it in 3 or 4 hours. At the end of the PCT distance learning course on the WIPO website, if you passed all the quizzes and stuff, it gives you a certificate. And the certificate shows that you really did pass all the quizzes. And I have an interesting piece of information for you. That certificate, if you give it to your boss, I absolutely promise your boss will give you a raise. Yes, yes. And my promise, I will stand behind it. If you try it and it doesn't work, you just give me your boss's name and phone number. I will call them up and I will explain to them that I promised that if you did that course and got the certificate, there are some online things that are kind of a joke. This is a serious course. You can't get through it without passing these tough quizzes, and there are 18 of them, and the quizzes are not easy. They're serious quizzes, and it really represents some achievement if a person got through that distance learning course. The other possibility is just hanging on the wall, you know, by your desk, and eventually your boss, no matter how clueless he or she may be, might notice this thing on the wall and might inform themselves about it and might realize that it's actually pretty hard work passing that course. How many of us have passed that course already? Raise your hands. This person here, good for you. How long did it take? 2 hours? There you go. Yeah, well, that's consistent with what it was like when I went through it. Another resource on the WIPO website, they have video presentations. Video presentations, each one 8 or 9 minutes long, and there are about 40 of them. And you can run that math in your head. It's 3 or 4 hours of material total, with catchy little theme music at the beginning of each one. And it's video, and it has this very nice fellow, Matthias Reichley, and he talks through like 30 lessons or something, introducing 30 different topics about PCT. Different people learn in different ways, right? Some of us like to read a book. Some people like to see a video, right? So that video series that WIPO makes available is also worth taking advantage of. It's free of charge, just like the distance learning course is free of charge. Other free of charge resources. There is something called the PCT Listserv. It's an email discussion group. Quick show of hands, how many people already belong to the PCT Listserv? Several. Those of you who didn't raise your hands, maybe you didn't belong to the listserv because you didn't know it existed or whatever. The PCT Listserv is an email discussion group of people who file PCT applications and fill out requests and deal with dinosaur bosses who don't understand PCT and all kinds of things. And those of you who raised your hands, you know, you can sort of watch the listserv and you'll see somebody post a question and you'll see other people being generous and trying to answer whatever that question might be. Those of you who didn't raise your hands, in a minute, I'll ask those people to raise their hands again. Why? Because you have a networking opportunity here. There's a morning break, there's a lunch break, there's an afternoon break. Those of you who didn't raise your hands, go find one of those people and chat them up during one of the breaks. It sounds like I'm kind of making a joke. No, I'm very serious. This program today gives people a chance to network with other people and chat with them. Find one of those people who belongs to the listserv and have them tell you about it, okay? Again, those who are already subscribed to the PCT listserv, raise your hands since you're going to be so popular during the breaks. Good for you. Okay. Now, a few more calibration things and resource things. How many of you are subscribed to my blog, the Ant-Like Persistence blog? A few. Well, the rest of you, you've got a little clicking to do. Go into Google or whatever, go into your favorite search engine and plug in like Oppedahl blog or something like that. And you'll see the Ant-Like Persistence blog, and you might as well subscribe to it. You won't ever get any spam except from me personally, but you won't get spam from anybody else. Your email address won't get sold to other people. And the blog has different sections, and one of the sections is PCT. And I write articles where I talk about what I think the best practices are for how to do this or how to do that, best practices for filing a provisional patent application, whatever. And I think you would find the blog to be interesting and perhaps diverting and sometimes perhaps helpful. And it's a searchable resource. You could plug in a word or two into the search box and you might find that I've written an article that helps to answer some question that you may have. And so subscribe to my blog, the Ant-Like Persistence blog. One or two more things that I should mention. I'm here sort of in at least two different roles, shall I say. One role that I am serving as I am here today is that WIPO sponsors me. WIPO arranges for me to teach classes all over the place. I get on airplanes, I go to different places and teach classes about PCT. I provide private training at law firms. I provide private training at corporations. And when I do that, I sort of kind of think I probably have to not shoot off my mouth because I'm representing like the World Intellectual Property Organization. They're part of the United Nations. Their job, you know, is to kind of help all the patent offices in the world coordinate their activities in some ways. And of course, WIPO would never be in a position to say, oh, that patent office, they don't do a very good job. WIPO would not be able to say that. They wouldn't be able to say, this patent office is slow, they don't do things the way they should, or their quality is higher or lower. No, WIPO's official position would always have to be something like, oh, every patent office does very good work and their people are always responsive and they return phone calls promptly and so on. WIPO would have to say something like that. They can't say that some patent office is better or worse than another or something. And yet the other thing is I stand before you as an opinionated, cranky patent lawyer from the mountains of Colorado. And I started my own firm a long time ago. And I shoot my mouth off all the time. I'm not shy. If I think some patent office didn't do something right, well, I will say they should have done this, they should have done that. And as we spend our time together here today, I will simply request that all of you please have in mind that every now and then you'll hear me shooting my mouth off, and please, we will have a shared understanding that when I shoot my mouth off, I removed my WIPO hat for a moment, and then I was just wearing my little hat that says, I'm a cranky, opinionated lawyer from the mountains of Colorado. And then later, when I stopped shooting off my mouth and started speaking calmly and in a neutral way, in which all patent offices are of equal quality and so on, you will understand I am once again speaking as a representative of WIPO. So can I please just request that all of us will understand that every now and then I'm changing hats during the day. The other thing I suppose there's just no choice but for me to mention is I'm a lawyer, I have clients, they pay me money. If I screw up and don't do a good job for them, they could sue me for malpractice and they would be entitled to. Not you. We're not here because you're my client, okay? I'm not your lawyer. I'm not giving you legal advice today. We're here in an educational setting, and the goal here is to do educational activity, not giving of legal advice. So that's what this slide is reminding us. What are we going to try to accomplish? Well, we'll talk about why do we even have a PCT? What is the point of the Patent Cooperation Treaty? What is the problem for which PCT might be the solution? We'll talk about some of the other things that are on this slide. We'll talk about recent developments. We'll try to talk about ways to be strategic, ways to make smart choices about how to use the PCT. When I talk about strategic use of the PCT, what I'm sort of getting at is, the metaphor I like to say, is that the Patent Cooperation Treaty could be thought of as a very fine, high-quality musical instrument, and that if you play it well, you could make nice music come out of it. And we'll talk about strategies for filing in which we're talking about trying to get nice music to come out of a musical instrument that might do a good job for us. We'll talk about ways to save a case even though something got screwed up. That's the procedural safeguards thing. And again, I welcome questions as they come to mind. So just raise your hand and speak up if you have a question. We're going to talk about Article 19 amendments. We're going to talk about filing a demand, 92 bis requests, 92 bis. Let's do a little audience calibration. Show of hands, how many of you know how to use a slide rule? More than I might have guessed. Good for you. Yes. There are a lot of good things about knowing how to use a slide rule. When you're using a slide rule, it turns out if you like multiply two numbers, you know, and you know, and you know, there's a place in the back of your brain that grows because you use a slide rule. There's a place in the back of your brain that says, I don't know exactly what the answer is, but I know that it's not 34, it's got to be like 340. It's got to be like in the hundreds, not in the tens. There's a part of the brain that's keeping track of the approximate size of what the answer must be. And that if some other person said, oh, the answer is 3.4, that part of the brain would say, no, no, they're off by 2 orders of magnitude. It's a skill that today's kids don't necessarily get quite the way us old timers do, those of us who trained on the slide rule. And you know exactly what I mean when I say this. He's nodding his head. How many have at least once in your life done computer programming with punch cards? Ah, there you go. A few. The youngsters in the room, you have no idea how easy you have it. In the old days of punch cards, it was different. It was different. Okay, how many have personally filed at least one PCT application? All right, how many have personally filed at least 10? At least 100? At least 500, at least 1,000. Yeah, that is either really good news or kind of sad, right? You could win a pie eating contest and the prize would be you get to eat more pie, right? Okay. How many in this room have a WIPO user ID and password and two-factor authentication, and they can log into ePCT? Many, perhaps half, maybe more than half. In a moment, folks, I'm going to ask those people to raise their hands again, and the rest of you who didn't raise your hand, I'm absolutely serious now. Pick one of those people and chat them up during a break or chat them up during the lunch. Sit by them during the lunch, because those of you who didn't raise your hands, it is a thing you need to start becoming familiar with. If you're going to have the job security that comes from the idea that you know how to do ePCT and other people don't, that's a job security thing. You can help get that job security and that personal satisfaction by sitting at a lunch table with one of the people who just raised their hands and have them tell you, yeah, I mean, of course, I'm going to stand in front of you and say, oh, it's wonderful using ePCT and it's easy to log in and the two-factor authentication is not really horrible, blah, blah, blah. Of course, I have to say that. I'm representing WIPO. But you'll chat up one of these people and they'll tell you what it's like from their perspective. Is it really as easy as Carl says, doing this or that in ePCT? You'll chat them up during the lunch break or the morning break or the afternoon break. So now, once again, I'm going to have a show of hands here. Those of you who don't have a WIPO user ID and password, I'm directing you, I'm instructing you, pick one of the people who does right now in the next minute and sit with them at the lunch break. I'm directing you to do it. And if I find out later you didn't do it, I'll be disappointed. Those who do have logged into ePCT, raise your hands. Okay. And the rest of you, pick one of those people to chat with during the break. I'm absolutely serious. Do it. Because it's an important thing to learn how to do, and it's one thing to hear me go on and on about how it's a good thing to learn, but if you chat with somebody, they can tell you what it's like in their own work, and so on. We'll talk about entry into the national phase, both in the US and in other places around the world. Skills. We're going to talk about different skills that we all need to acquire if we hadn't already. Things that you need to know how to do because things come up and somebody's got to be able to do it, and maybe you're the one who's got to do it. Whether it's filing a new PCT application, whether it's filing a national phase entry in the US, whether it's a bypass continuation that you're getting ready to file. Those of you who start using ePCT, what will eventually cross your mind is that one of its functions is kind of like private pair. It lets you see the cases that you already filed, except not. Only if you take those old cases and somehow get them loaded into the ePCT system, get them loaded into your workbench so that you can see those cases that you filed last week or last month. And it's one of the things we will talk about, getting your older PCT applications loaded into ePCT. We'll talk about some different reports that you might want to generate as part of doing your daily work. There are some things that we will touch on briefly. Why briefly? Because we only have one day. We have to pick and choose which things we talk about a lot and which things we talk about only briefly. These will get talked about briefly. Supplementary international search. Who has done a supplementary international search? Yeah, no one. One, two people, three. Who has done it 10 times? Oh, for goodness sake. Wow, we had somebody raise his hand. All righty. I will from time to time say, well, you want to learn more about this, go look in the applicant's guide. The applicant's guide, which is online on the WIPO website. Because it's online, it's sort of always up to date as compared to the old days when the applicant's guide was in 3-ring binders and you had to update physical pages. Why do we use PCT? Well, as this slide describes, it gives you an early indication maybe as to what's patentable and what's not. But let's just try to put into practical, stark terms why we might like PCT. And to do that, let me just ask, and I'm not asking people to reveal client secrets, but just in the most general way, can somebody tell me about some file you worked on, just roughly, how much money did it take to file a patent application in Europe? Some case that you worked on in recent times. Filing in Europe, how much money, just roughly? Somebody. 5,000? Bargain. 5,000 is cheap compared to the bills I sometimes get from European Council. I'm thinking 9,000, maybe $10,000. Of course, the currency exchange rates make a difference and how many claims there are and other things. But anyway, thousands of dollars anyway, whether it's the 5,000 that we heard or whether it's the 9,000 that you heard me say, thousands of dollars anyway to file in Europe. This is assuming that somebody already prepared the application. All we're talking about is getting it filed in Europe. Thousands of dollars. Okay. Japan. What's the cost to file in Japan? Huh? 15K with translations. Yes, I have certainly had cases where the bill that I received from Japanese counsel was in the neighborhood of 15K, partly because it's got to be translated into the Japanese tongue, and there are government fees that got to be paid in Japan and professional fees and so on. Korea, what's the cost to file in Korea? Comparable. Many thousands of dollars. $10,000 maybe. Again, Might be more, might be less. You know, if it's more pages, it's going to take more money just to translate the dang thing just because there are more pages. But whatever, thousands of dollars, maybe more than $10,000 to file in Korea. China, what's it cost to file in China? Huh? Why bother? Thank you, thank you. The thing is, if you file in any foreign country, including China, the decision that you make whether you're going to file in that country or not requires you to rub a crystal ball and predict during the next 20 years, will I end up wishing I had filed in that country? Because 20 years is how long patents last. Can any one of us predict with high confidence whether it will or won't be important to have filed in, say, China? What if 10 years from now their legal system has more to offer than what you or I might have thought? I mean, they didn't have a patent system just 20 years ago. They literally didn't have one. They now have a patent system, and sometimes some companies from outside of China do win cases in courts in China. It has happened. You know, I mean, 10 years ago, if you had asked a lot of people, do you think you would get a fair shake in a Chinese court? I remember talking to people who would be skeptical, and they would think, well, I don't know. But here we are in the year 2019, and you can read news stories, and sometimes some people do get a result in a Chinese court. So even if 10 years ago a person might have said, can't possibly be a good use of my money entering the national phase in China or whatever, now in 2019, I think for some companies, the decision-making process includes maybe we do file in China. Yeah. So anyway, rough amounts of money. Thousands in Europe, thousands, maybe more than 10,000 if you file in Japan or Korea, some thousands of dollars perhaps if you're going to file in China. And if it were not for PCT, if we didn't have PCT at all, if we were just filing, like there used to not be a PCT in 1978, that's when PCT started being available. In 1977, if you were going to try to extend your protection to, say, Japan or Korea, when would you have to do it? If you didn't have PCT, when would you have to do your foreign filing? Who knows? Within 1 year, within 1 year. And we will talk about that in more detail, but yes, within 1 year. It means that without PCT, you would be in a position of, you know, the light bulb blinks on, somebody invents something, and then what happens? Well, within a year, if you're going to file in Japan, you got to do it within a year. If you're going to file in Korea, you got to do it within a year, and so on. Thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of dollars being spent at a time when, likely as not, you don't yet even know whether the dang thing is patentable. Wouldn't it be nice if there were some aspect of the patent system that would let you postpone that very expensive and very difficult filing decision about filing in foreign countries for a longer time than 1 year, right? Wouldn't it be nice? And you all know where I'm going with this, PCT. Instead of having to make your decision within 12 months, the client can postpone their decision until when? 30 months. Yeah, that's an extra 18 months. During those 30 months, you will get at least some preliminary indication as to whether the dang thing is patentable or not. And if it turns out the dang thing isn't patentable, well, that's sort of bad news, but at least then, if it isn't patentable, don't spend the money in the foreign countries. Without PCT, the money is being spent in the foreign countries before 12 months has gone by, and if it later turned out it wasn't patentable, then what you might say is, we took a lot of money and flushed it down the toilet, and we can't get that money back. So what can we say about this? Well, there are timelines. The top timeline is the timeline of what goes on if you are not using PCT. The top timeline is the sort of traditional so-called Paris Convention timeline. This is the one where the light bulb blinks on over somebody's head. It's because they invented something. They file some kind of patent application in whatever country they're located in. And if they're going to file in other countries around the world, that's all those little 6 little arrows, that's what that represents, they'd have to do it within 12 months at a time when probably you don't yet know whether it's patentable. The bottom timeline is the PCT timeline, where that unpleasant, difficult, expensive decision-making process is postponed for an extra 30 months, for an extra 18 months, adding up to 30 months. And what might happen during those 30 months? Well, one thing that might happen is what I keep harping on. Well, then you perhaps find out that it's not patentable. And if it isn't, well, then don't spend that money. Don't flush the money down the toilet. Or you find out, well, it looks like it is patentable. Well, then that's one more input that the client can think about as they think, should we spend gobs of money with those 6 little arrows at the right-hand end of that timeline? But that's not the only thing that might happen during those 30 months. Who can guess where I'm going with this? What else might happen during the in-between time that might make a difference about whether to spend all that money? Search reports, other things. U.S. application might have good news, bad news. Other things, business results. Client comes back partway through the 30 months, client says, you know, we looked into it some more. Customers aren't even interested in buying this thing. We don't know why, but customers don't want to buy it. Well, then all of a sudden, maybe the decision is we're not going to spend money trying to get a patent on it because it's not commercially successful, perhaps. Or the other extreme, right? Client comes in partway through the 30 months and says, this is a successful product. It's successful. Well, then you could more confidently perhaps make a decision to spend gobs of money on filing patent applications around the world if it turned out the darn thing was financially successful. Or other possibilities, right? The invention, the light bulb that blinked on over somebody's head was what? Well, let's say it's a better mousetrap, okay? Partway through the 30 months, let's say, there's a development. What's the development? Some other thing gets rid of all the mice that you don't want. You know, the Pied Piper of Hamelin goes around and all the mice follow him into the sea and they all drown, and there aren't any mice anymore, which means nobody needs mousetraps. In other words, technological change or a changed external condition might lead to a situation where that invention just isn't as important as it seemed back when the first application was filed. These are all things that might happen during those 30 months and might make a big difference whether the client would want to spend all that money with those 6 arrows at the end of that lower timeline. But if you're on the top timeline, all that money's got to be spent at a much earlier time, and the client perhaps does not have as much information available to it. This is why we are all sitting in this room together. Those extra 18 months is why you are all here, okay? Now, everything I've just been saying is along the lines of PCT is wonderful, it's the greatest gift to the world of people who have light bulbs blinking on over their head, people who invent stuff, except not every country belongs to the PCT system. What's an example of a country that doesn't? Taiwan. What's another example? Argentina. Yeah, and there are others. When I the first time I ever served on the faculty of a PCT training course like this, which was a long time ago now. Bradley and I go way back. The first time I taught was probably 15 years ago. And back then, what I heard from folks at WIPO was the folks in Argentina, they're this close. They're going to join the PCT. And for 15 years, the folks in Argentina have been this close. Supposedly now they really are this close. Supposedly they really are going to join. And there are other countries that don't belong. It means that for you and me, when we are telling some client how wonderful it is, oh, with PCT, you don't have to worry about a thing because you get 30 months before you got to make any decisions. Unfortunately, you got to make sure the next few words come out of your mouth, except that there are some countries that don't belong to PCT. And then you'd have to talk with the client and maybe show them this map or whatever. Okay. So how would you pick as between the Paris path and the PCT path? How would you decide to do one or the other? Well, you can tell from everything I've been saying that we have no difficulty identifying certain factors that might make PCT a more attractive path. The thing is, there are some companies, some of you may have clients who don't file PCT. Some clients who will say, look, we always file in the same 2 or 3 places all around the world. We always file in the US plus Europe, let's say. We don't need PCT. We always know what we're going to do. We always file first in this country and then that one. It's what we always do. We don't need PCT. Okay, I mean, if a client is informed and they've thought this through, maybe they would not use PCT. But I got to tell you, they're spending money in country number 2, probably at a time when they do not yet know whether the thing is patentable. And it's just a factor that I think a company might want to think about as they decide whether to include PCT as part of their filing process. Now, if you are getting ready to file a PCT, is it necessary as part of using the PCT system? Is it necessary that you previously filed some previous patent application? Answer, no. Yeah, most of you knew the answer. It is not required that you previously filed any previous patent application. Or to take what I just said and to take what many of you already knew because you answered that question, to say it in a different way, if you want, the PCT application could be the first thing that ever got filed after the light bulb blinked on over somebody's head. The PCT might be the first thing that ever got filed. And if you click around in Patent Scope and just look at a bunch of PCT applications that different people filed, you will see some that are in that category where the PCT was the first thing that ever got filed. So it's just something we should keep in the back of our minds. That's one of the paths somebody might follow, and sometimes that's what people do. Let's see, a few other thoughts about this. This PCT timeline is kind of a repeat of the previous one with just a little more detail. This timeline reminds us that during those 30 months, there are some events that might happen along the way that we will talk about in some more detail. They include things like filing of a demand, an Article 34 amendment, filing an Article 19 amendment that you would do before international publication, supplementary international search, this thing that 3 people in the room have actually done. Later, if you did file a demand, well, later you get an answer back from the preliminary examining authority in which they tell you what they think about whether it's patentable or not. That's called the IPEA Chapter 2. And then what happens? National phase entry, spending money in all those countries around the world, those 6 arrows that represent enormous amounts of money being spent all around the world. Okay, international searching authorities. International searching authorities, there are now 23 of them. 22 are operational. The 23rd will be operational soon. For those of us who regularly file on behalf of clients located in the US, the searching authorities that we would run into over and over again are the 8 searching authorities listed on this slide. And of those 8, the ones that filers pick most often in the United States, just statistically, if you were to click through Patent Scope and just look at a whole bunch of PCTs that US filers filed, and you look to see what searching authorities did they pick, what you would find is that there's a very short list of about 3 searching authorities, which between them account for almost all the choices made by US filers. And those 3 are, who can guess what's on the list? EP, Korea, and US. Those 3 choices, EP, Korea, US, between them turn out to be almost the complete range of choices that cover almost all the choices made by US filers who file PCTs. In other words, the other 5 on this list don't get chosen very often. Is that because they're bad or something? No, not at all. Is it because they do poor quality work? That's not the point I'm making. No, it's just, I'm just observing that mostly US filers tend to pick US, Europe, Korea. Later, we will talk a little bit about some of the factors that influence perhaps choices that applicants make when they pick one searching authority or another. Now, what I will invite people to do who are with us here today, especially live in the room, please think a little bit of situations you've been in with different clients. And when we get to that topic, if there's anything somebody can share about factors that you know you've seen clients take into account, I'm not asking you to reveal client secrets or anything, but if in a very general way, there are any things that people might be able to share a little bit about factors that you've seen clients take into account in picking a searching authority, think about it a little bit and see if there's something you can share a little bit when we get to that topic. Preliminary examining authorities. Well, it turns out the list is exactly the same. The patent offices that choose to offer services of being a searching authority, those exact same patent offices, it turns out, offer their services as preliminary examining authorities. And the same 8 tend to be available for US filers, and the same 3 are the ones that get picked when people do file demands. What does the preliminary examining authority do? Well, the answer is nothing most of the time. In 90% of PCT cases, the applicant doesn't file a demand, which means there is no preliminary examining authority that does any work on the file. So, but 10% of the time, the applicant does choose to file a demand. We'll talk about that in the afternoon. What does the DOEO do, the designated or elected office? Their job is to handle the paperwork of entering the national phase. In the timelines, we had the 6 little arrows at the end that represented spending gobs of money at the end of the 30 months. These are the offices who receive that gobs of money. Their job is to receive a lot of money from you, and then they make it so that you have a pending patent application in their patent office, and then if things go well, maybe you get a granted patent in their patent office. Okay. The ones that many people in this room would encounter more often than any other are the 5 that are listed here: US, European Patent Office, Japan, Korea, China. Those 5 offices taken together, there's a kind of a shorthand, people call them the IP5. The 5 patent offices, which between them represent by far the majority of all the patent filing activity in the world. Well over 80% of all the patent filing activity in the world is accounted for by the activities in those 5 patent offices. There are over 100 other patent offices around the world, but these 5 between them account for by far the majority of the patent filing activity around the world. What is a typical sequence of events in a PCT process? Well, most of you know this sequence of events because you filed plenty of PCT applications. So for most of you, this is very familiar. What happens first? Well, the light bulb blinks on over somebody's head. They invented something, right? Then they file a provisional. How many have filed a provisional at least once? Yeah, almost everybody. How many have filed a provisional under terrible time pressure and the document was of limited quality? Yeah, I have. You do what you got to do sometimes, right? You know, the phone rings and the client says, oh, by the way. You hate it, right? The phone rings and they say, oh, by the way. You know something bad is happening next, right? Oh, by the way, the client says, we're going to start selling our product tomorrow. And I can't imagine that's important from the point of view of patents, but I figured I should just ask in case maybe it matters, right? And suddenly 2 or 3 people, you and 1 or 2 of your colleagues, are going to have to rush around because they're going to start selling the product tomorrow, right? And so you assemble whatever you can and you file it as a provisional that is prepared under terrible time pressure. The documents are of limited quality. It's not your fault. You're doing what you can under terrible time pressure. Anyway, that's the provisional that we see here on this screen, right? And what I invite all of us to consider is that if that provisional is of limited quality, maybe we don't drag it out until 12 months to write a good patent application. Maybe what we do, if we know in our heart of hearts that that provisional was filed in great haste and wasn't necessarily a strong document, we try to set to work and draft a good patent application pretty close on the heels of that provisional to minimize how much time goes by before we actually get a filing date with a good document that everyone involved can be proud of. But in the extreme case, how long could you drag it out? We all know. We have it memorized, 12 months. And what happens? The PCT application gets filed. You filed it or I filed it, somebody filed it. Where do you file it? Well, you file at what is called the receiving office. They then run it through the photocopier and make 2 copies. I say photocopier, but of course now it's all computerized. They electronically send a copy to the searching authority. It is called the search copy. They send a copy to the International Bureau in Switzerland. That is called the record copy. And broadly speaking, at that point, the receiving office has done almost everything they need to do on the file. Then what happens? Well, the searching authority that has received the search copy, oddly enough, they search. They search the prior art. Many of you are very familiar with this. And then they establish what's called the International Search Report and the written opinion, which is perhaps a smiley face or a frowny face. A thing that might say, oh yeah, we think it's patentable, or it might say, you know, we don't think it's patentable, or whatever. Then what happens? Well, the International Bureau publishes that application at P+18, priority date plus 18 months. Then what happens? P+30 comes around, and if you're going to enter the national phase in the US, China, and Japan, that's when you got to do it. And as most of you probably have completely memorized, EP gives you an extra month, as does Korea. And these are all called designated offices. Some of you have completely memorized which countries are 31-month countries and which ones are 30-month countries. Yeah. Many of you have memorized lots of 2-letter codes, right? 2-letter code for Brazil, 2-letter code for Ireland, IE, 2-letter code for Israel, IL. What is IS? Iceland. 2-letter code for Spain, ES, yeah. Germany, DE, yep. It's sick, right, that all of you have this memorized, right? That your brain is clogged with that. You could have had in your brain happy stuff, like happy life experiences or something, and that whole part of your brain is filled with the kind of stuff that is making all of us sit here in this room together, right? You self-selected into it, you know you did. Now, while we're talking about people who self-select, has anyone, and when I say anyone, I mean anyone in addition to me, has anyone in addition to me ever like awakened in the middle of the night, scared, drenched in sweat perhaps, and you think, why did I wake up? Oh, I'm wondering, did I miss my 30 months to enter the national phase in that case that we've been talking? Anybody besides me ever have that experience? A few of you, yeah, several. And you know, you could have picked a different job. You could have, but no, you self-selected into this job where obsessive compulsive disorder may have its own payoff. You self-selected into this job where what makes you feel good is that you calculated some complicated set of dates and you got the right answer and it matched what somebody else got, and you get this little burn of pleasure that can't be met by anything else in your life, you know? Yeah, obsessive compulsive whatever, and you self-selected into it, right? And your boss either does or does not fully appreciate how lucky they are to have you actually doing a job where you enjoy obsessing about dates and details and time limits and stuff, right? Your boss either does or does not understand that that's actually a good thing, right? Anyway, 31 months, right? And quite a few of you said to yourself, I knew 31 months. Sure, I knew. Long before I came into this room, I knew 31 months. Yeah, there it is. Okay. Second typical sequence of events. Yeah, that slide I meant to delete. You get to skip that slide. Ha 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 ha. Paris Convention. There's a very famous movie where 2 men are walking toward an airplane in a foggy place and one says to the other, we'll always have Paris. Is it 2 men? No, it's a man and a woman. Okay, what movie am I thinking of? Casablanca, one of the best movies ever made. Who has not seen the movie Casablanca? Okay, the rest of us, we could take a vote, but we don't have to. See the movie. You'll love it. You'll absolutely love the movie Casablanca, I promise. Okay, there will be 1 or 2 cultural references during our time together today, and you've just seen one of them. The Paris Convention, the Paris Convention. The Paris Convention was that top timeline that we saw, right? And for many of you, the Paris Convention is, it's in your mind because whenever that first application was filed, maybe it was a provisional, we all sort of memorized that within 12 months, that would be when we have to file our non-provisional if we're going to in a foreign country, perhaps. The 12 months, okay? It comes from Article 4 of the Paris Convention, and Article 4 of the Paris Convention not only establishes a 12-month priority period for utility patents, it also establishes a time period for priority claims for trademarks, and that time period is how long? Be brave. 6 months. For trademark, 6 months. There is a third kind of intellectual property for which Article 4 of the Paris Convention establishes a timeline of a certain number of months. What is that third kind of intellectual property, and how many months is it? Design, and how many months? 6. Yes. Yes. Those of you who didn't know that, make a little flashcard, memorize it. 6 months for design, 6 months for trademarks, 12 months for utility patents. Okay. Now, suppose somebody filed a provisional, and a month or two later they filed another provisional. Why? Because the light bulb blinked on again. They thought of a few more things, and they filed another provisional. This happens, right? It happens sometimes. I've had cases where there are several provisionals that get filed over the span of some weeks or months. Which one do you count from to decide when do I have to file my PCT? The oldest one, right. What if you screw up and you don't file within 12 months of the oldest one? Well, this slide is reminding us, suppose you filed a provisional on a date, A1, you then filed a regular US non-provisional a year later, and then you filed a PCT a year after that. Can the PCT claim priority back to the A2? Could you say, well, I filed within 12 months of A2? The assumption here is that all three applications have the same substantive content. The answer is the PCT application's priority claim will fail. And if somebody did this, and if they didn't tell the world that they sort of pretended that A1 hadn't been filed, I promise you at litigation time it will blow up. At litigation time, the lawyer on the other side, even if they are incompetent, they will understand this well enough to know that the priority claim was defective. Second example, provisional A1, provisional A2 discloses more stuff. B and B prime are both contained in the second application A2. How late can you postpone, drag your feet, and file the PCT on the assumption that it's going to try to get a patent on B? Answer, you got to do it within 12 months of the oldest application in which B had been disclosed. In this case, September of 2014 is what you would be counting from. Now, the next slide, many of you know where I'm going with this. The next slide says, suppose the person drafting the PCT has the self-control, the discipline, to only claim B prime. Now, I'm assuming a fact, not an evidence. No one has the self-control to only claim certain things. They always claim everything they can think of. But if somebody had the self-control to only claim B prime, how long could you drag your feet and wait and file your PCT and the priority claim would still work? The answer is you would get to count 1 year from that second application, the first one where B prime ever got disclosed. That priority claim would work. You can also do what's called serial abandonments. Article 4 of the Paris Convention explains that if you want to, you could start your 12 months all over again. How do you do it? You expressly abandon whatever it is that you filed. You expressly abandon it, leaving no rights outstanding, and then file a new application, perhaps a new provisional, and that if you do that, you get to start counting your 12 months all over again. Now, whenever the first time was somebody told me about this, I was all itchy and squirmy in my chair. The idea that anybody would ever give up a filing date drives me nuts. But there are real-life cases where companies have done this. So anyway, it's there. Express abandonment. So provisional was filed. Almost a year later, it was expressly abandoned, leaving no rights outstanding. Another provisional is filed. How long could you drag your feet and wait and file your PCT and the priority claim will still work? Answer, you get to count a year from the second provisional. if you really did expressly abandon the first one, leaving no rights outstanding. Now, I'm waiting for alert people in the group here to say, how do you even know for sure that you left no rights outstanding, right? You could petition to revive, you could do restoration of the right of priority. There are all these things that make it so that you could put 3 or 4 people in the room and ask them on this fact pattern, is it really true that the person left no rights outstanding? And you might get different answers from different people. Your question?
You have to have expressly abandoned A1 before you file it?
Yeah, the chronology, the question was, when exactly did the express abandonment have to have occurred? And Article 4 of the Paris Convention answers our colleague's question. Article 4 says the express abandonment needs to have happened chronologically before that second one got filed. So this slide assumes like 1 or 2 days before, and that satisfies the requirement. But what you are not allowed to get away with under Article 4 of Paris is filing the second one and then later saying, oh, now I feel like abandoning the first one. That won't be good enough. Yeah. What are we going to... Just allow time to go by. Yeah, you have a provisional and say 15 months goes by. Well, at that point, you can't even do restoration of the right of priority at that point. Well, then that provisional presumably counts as leaving no rights outstanding. You could then file a brand new provisional, and yes, that would start the 12 months again. I think most practitioners would be comfortable giving an opinion that you have satisfied that thing in Article 4 just by letting time go by. That's right. Now, communications to the client. The communication to the client, obviously, is that every time we ever file anything that has the possibility that later it might serve as a priority document, for example, filing a provisional, every time we file anything that has the chance that it might later serve as a priority document, clearly we need to write a letter to the client. Dear client, we just filed this provisional. We're telling you, you got to make up your mind, and within 12 months, if you want to file in any other countries, let us know. Because if you don't tell us and the 12 months comes and goes, it'll be too late. That kind of letter has to be written. Or if you're in-house, if you're within a corporation or something, then when I say client, I mean, you would have your own context within the corporation where you work. Client might be a term that sort of means the head of the business unit within the company that you're you know, the technology area within the company or whatever. But somebody somewhere, some decision maker, needs to receive this letter or email or whatever it is, the one that says, well, the 12 months is now ticking away and you got to make up your mind before the 12 months is up. Now, what this slide is really getting at, and some of you may be able to say from your own thinking where I'm going with this, it's about 1/10 of why I'm saying this is so that the knowledge gets communicated to the recipient of the letter. No, 9/10 of it is covering your behind. Yeah, that's what it is. The reason we do this is so that later when the client plays dumb and says, how come you never filed any foreign applications? And you say, oh, well, you never told us to. And the client says, well, when would I have to have done it? And you say, well, last week you would have had to give us instructions. Client says, how come you never told me I had to give you instructions by last week? You need to be able to point to the place in the file that shows that you told them a long time ago that they had to give instructions by last week, covering your behind. There will be several times during today where we will get to a certain slide or a certain point, and we will have this shared understanding that the slide superficially is saying, you got to make sure this message gets communicated to so-and-so so that they know whatever it is we're talking about. And we will all look at the slide and we will all know, no. The reason Carl put that slide up there is we have to cover our behinds. We have to be able to point to the place in the file where we can prove that we told the client this. Yeah. Okay. Things that you're all going to need to know how to use if you didn't already know. EFS Web, of course. Private pair, of course. PCT Safe, except that it is on the way out, and eventually PCT Safe won't matter anymore. ePCT, of course. Everybody needs to know how to use Patent Scope. Most of you already do. It is sort of like public pair. Okay. The applicant's guide I mentioned, the distance learning course I mentioned. ePCT. What is ePCT good for? How many have filed at least one patent application using ePCT? All right. Now, there is the aspect of EPCT that's kind of like private pair. The aspect of EPCT where you can click and say, I want to see the status of some file that I filed a couple of weeks ago or something. Or I want to see the documents that are in some file that I filed a few weeks ago, which is kind of like private pair. Question, how many have at least once in your life used EPCT for its function that is kind of like private pair? Some of you. The rest of you, you know where I'm going with this. You're going to want to chat with those people during the lunch break. I'm absolutely serious. I am deadly serious. This sounds like me either trying to be kind of funny or something. No, I'm being very serious. In a moment, I'll ask you again, if people raise your hands if you have used EPCT kind of like private pair so that you can see what's going on in a pending PCT application. And the rest of you, chat them up during a lunch break or the morning break or the afternoon break. Do it. Absolutely do it, because you yourself are going to need to know how to do that stuff. And if you get good at it, you have job security. And if you ever get fired, you can instantly find another job because you'll be able to put on your resume that you know how to do EPCT. I'm serious. I'm absolutely serious. So again, those who have done the sort of thing that's kind of like private pair in EPCT, raise your hands so you'll be popular during the breaks. Yeah, chat with these people. Now, I saw you nodding your head. You were one of the people raise your hand. I'm putting you on the spot here, but I mean, am I right? I mean, is it helpful to? Yeah, it's important. It's important. So chat up those folks during the lunch break. I'm very serious. Okay. What are the things you can do in EPCT? It's a lot of things, and this slide mentions some of them. If you're going to file in ROUS, the receiving office of the US, that is to say, if you're going to file in EFS Web to file a PCT, you can use it to make your zip file. Let's just spend a brief minute now on zip files, and later we'll talk about zip files some more. But right now, let's talk briefly about zip files. How many of you, when you have filed a PCT application, have at least once uploaded a zip file into EFS Web? Maybe half. How many of you in recent days or weeks have filed a PCT in EFS Web and you did not upload a zip file? You can guess where I'm going with this. You want to be trendy, modern, and up-to-date. The trendy, modern, and up-to-date people are the ones who upload a zip file as part of their filing process. I'm just spotting the issue right now, and later we'll get to a part where we will talk about reasons why it's really good if we include uploading a zip file as part of our process of filing a PCT if the place where we're filing it is in the ROUS. How many have at least once filed a PCT application at ROIB? A few. It turns out sometimes that's the smartest place to file. ROUS, of course, is where most people file their PCTs if they're located in the United States, but ROIB is a good thing to know as a place to file. Why? How many of you remember that miserable time a couple of years ago between Christmas and New Year's where EFS Web was broken for like 4 days in a row? Does anyone besides me remember that horrible time? Yeah, EFS Web was broken. Not only was EFS Web broken, the contingency server, the one that's supposed to always work when the main one is busted, it was busted. They were both plugged into the same extension cord and somebody tripped over it and they were both broken for 4 days. I think I'm not wearing my WIPO hat right there, huh? Now, if you go to my blog and put in the search box something like EFS Web outage or something, you'll find a blog article that I posted. It was dated April 1 of some particular year, and the blog article said, U.S. Patent Office has moved the contingency EFS Web server to the Patent Office that's in Denver. Why? Well, that way you can't like trip over one extension cord and knock out both filing servers. If the one in Washington is broken, the one in Denver hopefully would still be working. It was an April Fool's article that I posted. A year later, I posted an article in April 1 in my blog where I said, oh, you can now go to any one of the regional patent offices and you can hand file any patent application in any of the offices, including the one here in Silicon Valley. And of course, that was an April Fool's joke. And I hate to think, what if somebody relied on that article and went in person to San Jose and said, I'd like to file my patent application? I finally realized I had to put something right in the article that said this is a spoof. Anyway, ROUS. Almost everybody does most of their filings in ROUS. The four-letter acronym ROUS is one that we will talk about briefly now, and then we will take our morning break, which will happen in 10 minutes, and the break will last 15 minutes, and then we will come back. But between now and when the break happens, one of the things we're going to talk about is what ROUS really means, and it doesn't mean receiving office of the U.S. It means rodents of unusual size. And what is that a reference to? Who knows? Princess Bride, also one of the best movies ever made. Oh, who has seen Princess Bride? Yes. Who recommends it to others? Yes. Who has not seen Princess Bride? You got to see it. I recommend it. Oh, you'll love it. You'll absolutely. It is a sweet movie. It has stuff that is funny that little kids would enjoy. It has stuff that is funny that grown-ups enjoy. It's just a sweet, sweet movie. Find somebody you love and care about and sit down next to them with some popcorn and watch Princess Bride if you had never seen it. You have, the rest of you who have seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. It's a nice movie. My name is Hugo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. He knew where I was going with this one. Yeah, yeah. So anyway, whenever we mention ROUS, yes, superficially we're talking about receiving office of the U.S., but we all know we're talking about rodents of unusual size, okay? For the rest of today's program. What else can you do with ePCT? Well, the third bullet here is reminding us you use it to see your pending PCT applications. This is the function that's kind of like private pair. You can see stuff that most people can't see because when it's pending and you just filed it a few weeks ago, it's secret. Nobody can see it except you can because you were smart and you made it so that you could see it in the ePCT system. You can use it to see all your PCTs going all the way back to 2009. ePCT is a very convenient filing mechanism for follow-on filings, or what in Europe they call SFDs, subsequently filed documents. Things that you file after you filed the application in the first place. Article 19 amendments is one category, demands, Article 34 amendments, 92 BIS changes. 92, who has filed a 92 BIS change? Many, most of you. Who has done a 92 BIS change in ePCT? I'll put you on the spot, sir. You have done a 92 BIS change in ePCT, is that right? I apologize for putting you on the spot, but later today we'll talk about it in more detail. But can you share with the group, was it miserable? Was it horrible? Was it easy? How would you describe it? It was really easy, we heard him say. All right. Now, one of the running themes is going to be probably, and thank you, by the way, thank you for sharing and being a good sport about me putting you on the spot. One of the themes today is going to be, it's good to learn how to use ePCT. It's good to be familiar with it. It's good to know how to click and do different things. It's just a good thing to know how to do. You can do 92 BIS changes in other ways. You can make something in your word processor and pop it on the fax machine and send it to Switzerland. And that can be how you do a 92 BIS change. Or you can do what this guy does. He goes to ePCT, and that's how he does his 92 BIS change, okay? And you can guess where I'm going with this. If he does it, he's being trendy, modern, and up to date. And there are reasons why his life is probably better compared to what it would be like if he did it kind of the old-fashioned way where you send a fax to Switzerland and somehow it gets done that way, okay? We want to be trendy, modern, and up to date. It means that we make fewer mistakes. It means that we are less likely to commit malpractice. It means that we have job security. It means that if we get fired, we can more quickly find a new job because somebody else probably has enough of a clue to know that it's good that you know how to do ePCT, and so on, and so on. By the way, who knows what BIS means? What's it mean?
Like the second version.
The second version, yeah. From what language? Yeah, French and then Latin. You go far enough back, it's Latin. Bis means the second. So 92 bis means sort of the second version of Rule 92 is what it means. Yep, he knew. He knew. Give me 5 this way. There you go. Yeah, 92 bis. All right. Okay. Those of you who have not yet gotten a WIPO user ID and password, these are the steps you would go through. It's easy. It's easy. You go to the WIPO website, you click, you do 1 or 2 things. They send you one of those confirming emails. You click on the link. Now you have your account. Then you set up your so-called two-factor authentication. The two-factor authentication, you get to pick. There are 3 different ways to do your two-factor authentication. One way is it sends you a little text message on your phone. Another way is it shows up in your Authenticator app on your phone, or your Authenticator app, in my case, that I run on my computer. Third choice is a so-called browser certificate. And those who are truly geeky have all 3 of them set up in their account. I put myself into that category. I have all 3 kinds of authentication working. I can go to my browser, and the mere fact that the certificate is somehow inside my browser means usually I don't need to do the thing with my phone to log in. But if I'm on somebody else's computer, well, then the certificate's not there. Then I use perhaps my cell phone text message thing as part of logging in, or the Authenticator app. Now, we're about to do our break, but before we do, show of hands, how many of you who do this two-factor authentication sometimes do it by the text message in your phone method? A lot of people, a lot of people. How many use the Authenticator app approach, like Google Authenticator or whatever? Some of you. How many use the browser certificate approach? Some of you. Those of you who didn't raise your hand to any of the 3 questions, you know where I'm going with this. We have a break coming up in 4 minutes. Chat up one of those people. I'm telling you, you might as well do it. You're sitting here surrounded by colleagues who are probably going to be generous. Oh, by the way, those of you who raise your hands, I'm requesting you to be generous. Give your thoughts and your encouragement to the other people, the ones who had not done any of that two-factor authentication. Help them learn how to do that stuff. Okay. That's important. It's important. The thing is, becoming familiar with this two-factor authentication is probably something you already sort of became familiar with from other stuff, like logging in for your computer banking or logging into, I don't know, Facebook or whatever. Now, the people at WIPO intend that each user has their own user ID and password. This is different from how it used to be, with PAIR and EFS Web. The way it used to be, as you all know, is that everybody in the office would share the EPF file and everybody would know the password, and that's how everyone logged into PAIR, right? No, that's not what WIPO has in mind. They have in mind that each individual user has their own user ID and password, no sharing. Even there are firms who will say, oh, please, 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 can we just say that our docket department all uses just one account? And the folks at WIPO would say, no, 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 we want each of them to have their own individual user ID and password. We'll talk briefly about patent scope, and then it will be time for our break. One of the things about patent scope, how many of you know about permalinks? Proudly, come on. Permalinks, it's this thing that you'll see when you're in patent scope, and you can right-click on it and copy it and paste it into whatever you want, into your docket system, into your intranet. You could paste it into an email that you're sending to a colleague or to a client, and it's a link that will always work. Where am I going with this? Think of, say, private pair. You're in private pair, and you get to a page that's an important page that shows, the case just got allowed or something. And you might say to yourself, I want to send a link to this page in private pair to, say, the client, so that they could click on the link and see the same thing I'm seeing. Does it work? No, not in private pair. It doesn't work. Those links are designed by evil people. I'm not wearing my WIPO hat here. Evil people who apparently had a conscious goal of making it impossible for anyone to email a link to anyone else and have that person be able to see what you would like them to see. In contrast, these links always work. You send it to someone, it will work. That's the idea of a permalink. Permalinks are designed that they will always work, and you can safely email it to someone, and if they click on it, they will see the same thing that you're seeing. So permalinks are important. The applicant's guide we talked about, the distance learning course we talked about. Don't forget my promise. If you get the certificate, show it to your boss, and if you don't get a raise, let me know. I will make sure you get a raise. After the break, we will start talking about the process of picking a receiving office. The break starts now, and please come back in 15 minutes. Thank you.